Where are you following us from? Drop your country in the comments. I love knowing that this story is reaching so many corners of the world. And if this story moves you as much as it moves me to tell it, don't forget to subscribe and like. Believe me, what you're about to hear will go straight to your heart. So now let's begin with a story of love, loss, and second chances that will change your perspective on what truly matters in life. The echo of the shouts still resonated in the mahogany-paneled walls of the law firm 3 years later, as if the hateful words had been etched into the wood itself. Diego Herrera could remember every poisonous syllable Isabel had thrown at him that grey November day in Madrid, when the leaden sky seemed to mirror the state of their dying marriage. "You will never see me again, Diego. Never again!" Isabel Morales had shouted as she signed the divorce papers with hands that trembled from both rage and pain, her green eyes shining with an explosive mix of fury and desperation that Diego had never seen before, not even in their worst fights. "I hate you. I hate everything you stand for. I hate your money. I hate your hotels. I hate the way you've turned our love into just another business transaction." Tears had started to roll down her cheeks, but Isabel had wiped them away with rough motions, as if each drop were a betrayal of her dignity. 5 years, Diego. 5 years of my life waiting for you to love me more than your damn businesses. 5 years of being the perfect wife, the perfect hostess, the trophy wife who smiles and says nothing while you built your empire on the ruins of our marriage. Diego had remained impassive behind his €3,000 Armani suit, adjusting the white gold cufflinks that had cost more than many people earned in a year, as he watched the woman who had been his wife for 5 years crumble in front of him like a building being demolished. His face, chiseled by years of difficult decisions and ruthless negotiations, had not shown a hint of emotion. The lawyers present had later commented that Diego Herrera had handled his divorce with the same calculated coldness with which he closed his multi-million-dollar deals. "One less woman to worry about," he had replied with that coldness that characterized powerful men, although inside something was shattering like fine glass hitting a marble floor. The words had come out of his mouth like blades, designed to sever any emotional bond that might remain between them. But he had seen the exact moment something had definitively broken in Isabel's eyes. He had seen how the woman who had once looked at him with adoration now looked at him as if he were a stranger, as if the 5 years of marriage had been a nightmare from which she was finally waking up. The lawyers had exchanged uncomfortable glances, accustomed to contentious divorces, but rarely witnessing such complete emotional destruction. Dr. Martinez, the senior partner of the firm, had cleared his throat nervously before reading the final terms of the agreement. Isabel had received €120,000, a sum that was pocket change to Diego, the equivalent of what he spent on a single business dinner at the Ritz Hotel, and her freedom. Diego had kept his empire, €800 million in the largest hotel chain in Spain, properties in every major city in the country, shares in publicly traded companies, and a heart that refused to admit it had just lost the only thing it had truly loved in his 42 years of life. Now, sitting in his 42nd floor office in the Torre Picasso, Diego watched Madrid stretch out at his feet like a chessboard, where he was the undisputed king. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered him a panoramic view of the Spanish capital. From the winding streets of the Madrid de los Austrias to the modern skyscrapers of the financial district, everything seemed to be under his dominion. His Italian mahogany desk, as large as a billiard table, was impeccably organized. To the right, a pile of contracts awaiting his signature, each one representing millions in revenue. To the left, financial reports that confirmed his empire had grown by 15% in the last quarter. In the center, a silver-framed photograph of himself shaking hands with the King of Spain during the inauguration of his most exclusive hotel in Mallorca. But in the drawers of that same desk, hidden beneath tax documents and real estate contracts, was a photograph that Diego had never had the courage to throw away. Isabel smiling on their honeymoon in Santorini, with the Mediterranean sun creating a golden halo around her brown hair, her green eyes sparkling with genuine happiness. On silent nights, when the noise of the city faded and the last employees of the building had gone home, Diego could still hear that scream that had marked the end of everything. "You will never see me again, Diego." But the words that tormented him the most were the last ones Isabel had whispered, almost to herself, as she picked up the signed documents. "Someday, you're going to realize what you lost." And by then it will be too late. 3 years later, surrounded by luxury but empty of love, Diego was beginning to suspect that day had arrived. But was it really too late? Or did fate have a second chance in store that neither of them could imagine? The El Jardín restaurant was the epitome of Madrid elegance, a gastronomic cathedral where money and power met every night to worship exclusivity. Located in the heart of the exclusive Salamanca neighborhood, between high-fashion boutiques and art galleries that only the very wealthy could afford, its tables were always reserved weeks in advance, and that night Diego had chosen the perfect place to celebrate what he considered his greatest business triumph in years. 50 million more in the pocket, he murmured with satisfaction as he adjusted his navy silk Hermes tie, observing his reflection in the window overlooking the Paseo de la Castellana. The acquisition of his closest competitor's hotel chain had been a brilliant maneuver, executed with the surgical precision that characterized all his moves in the business world. The restaurant's dim lights created an intimate and sophisticated atmosphere. The tables were dressed with immaculate white linen tablecloths, French porcelain dinnerware, and baccarat crystal glasses that refracted the candlelight like small diamonds. The murmur of discreet conversations mingled with the gentle clinking of cutlery against porcelain, creating the perfect symphony of privilege. Diego felt like the perfect predator in his natural territory. At 42, he was still an imposing man. 6'1", an athletic build maintained by 3 weekly workouts with a personal trainer, black hair slightly graying at the temples that gave him an air of distinguished authority. His Italian suit fit his figure perfectly, and his genuine leather shoes gleamed under the restaurant lights. Power, money, conquest. It was all part of a game he mastered perfectly. Tonight he was expecting Sofia Montenegro, a 28-year-old model he had met at a charity gala the week before. Sofia had everything Diego looked for in the women in his post-divorce life. Stunning beauty, enough intelligence to hold an interesting conversation, and the wisdom not to ask questions about long-term commitments. Mr. Herrera, the maitre d' approached with the reverence reserved for the most important clients. Your table is ready. Shall we serve the champagne while you wait? Dom Perignon 98, Diego replied without consulting the menu. It was his way of setting the tone for the evening. Only the best, only the most expensive, only the most exclusive. He headed toward his usual table, number 12, perfectly located to have a complete view of the restaurant without being bothered by prying eyes. It was a table he had reserved hundreds of times for business dinners, romantic dates, and personal celebrations. A table that, ironically, he had never shared with Isabel during their 5 years of marriage, because she had considered El Jardín pretentious and cold, like eating in a museum. A waitress approached with a bottle of Chateau Margaux 1996, the most expensive wine on the list, which Diego had ordered to accompany dinner. The bottle cost more than many people earned in a month, but to Diego it was simply another detail in his constant quest for perfection. Diego casually looked up to approve the label, an automatic gesture he had performed thousands of times in his life, and the world stopped. Isabel, his Isabel, with the brown hair he had once caressed every morning upon waking, now pulled back in a professional, impeccable bun. She wore the restaurant's black and white uniform, knee-length skirt, starched white blouse, black apron with the logo embroidered in gold. But what made Diego feel as if he had been punched in the stomach, expelling all the air from his lungs, was the pronounced and unmistakable curve of her belly. She was pregnant, visibly pregnant, about 7 months along from what he could calculate. Time stood still in those first seconds of mutual recognition. Diego felt as if he was seeing an apparition, as if his mind had conjured the image of the woman he had tried to forget for 3 years. But this was real, brutally real. Isabel's green eyes met his for a fraction of a second, and Diego saw a complete storm of emotions pass through them. Genuine surprise, as if she hadn't expected this encounter either. Pain, deep and still fresh after 3 years. Shame for being seen in this situation. And finally, an iron determination that Diego recognized immediately, the same determination she had shown on the day of their divorce. Isabel had changed. Her cheeks, once full and rosy, were now thinner, defined by what seemed to be months of hard work. Her hands, which had once been as soft as silk because she had never needed to work, now showed the small scars and calluses of someone who earned a living through physical effort. But her eyes, those green eyes that had been his downfall and his salvation, maintained that intensity that had made him fall in love with her a decade ago. "Good evening, sir," Isabel said in a professional voice, although Diego could detect the slight tremor that betrayed her apparent calm. "Would you like me to uncork the wine now, or would you prefer to wait for your companion to arrive?" The words were stuck in Diego's throat as if they were made of sand. His ex-wife, the woman who had been the absolute owner of his heart, the person who had known every one of his secrets, every one of his vulnerabilities, was serving tables in a restaurant, pregnant with another man's child, treating him with the formality reserved for strangers. It was as if the 5 years of marriage, the shared laughter, the nights of passion, the promises of eternal love, had been erased from existence, replaced by this professional and distant interaction. Diego tried to find his voice, but the words that normally flowed as easily as water had become stones in his throat. This man who could convince millionaire investors in 5-minute presentations, who could negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts without batting an eye, found himself completely speechless in front of the woman he had once promised to love until death. "I shall," he finally managed to articulate, but Isabel was already moving, preparing to uncork the wine with precise professional movements. Diego watched her hands work, hands that had once traced every contour of his body, that had held his face during their most passionate kisses, that had worn the wedding ring he had placed on her finger with so much love. Now those same hands handled a corkscrew with the dexterity of someone who had learned the trade out of necessity, not by choice. The sound of the cork coming out of the bottle resonated like a gunshot in the silence that had formed between them. Isabel poured a small amount into Diego's glass, waiting for his approval with the professional patience of an experienced waitress. Diego tasted the wine mechanically without really savoring it. The liquid could have been water or poison, because all his attention was focused on the woman in front of him, on the devastating mystery of how she had arrived at this situation. "It's perfect," he murmured, although he hadn't paid any attention to the taste. "Excellent." Isabel began to fill his glass with fluid movements. "Your companion hasn't arrived yet. Would you like to order something while you wait?" The word companion fell between them like a bomb. Isabel knew Diego was waiting for someone, probably another woman, probably another replacement in the long series of superficial relationships he had maintained since their divorce. And the way she said the word, with a slight emphasis that only someone who had known him intimately could detect, confirmed that the news hurt her more than she was willing to admit. How had Isabel ended up in this situation? What secrets did that pregnancy hide? And what chain of events had transformed the elegant wife of a hotel magnate into a pregnant waitress who treated her ex-husband like a complete stranger? The dinner had been an absolute disaster. Sofia Montenegro had arrived 30 minutes late, apologizing profusely as her stiletto heels clattered against the restaurant's marble floor. She was exactly what Diego had expected. Spectacularly beautiful, impeccably dressed in a Carolina Herrera design that probably cost more than Isabel earned in a month, and completely oblivious to the silent drama that unfolded every time a certain waitress approached their table. Throughout dinner, Diego had maintained a mechanical conversation with Sofia, automatically responding to her anecdotes about photo shoots in Paris and parties on multi-millionaire yachts, while his eyes unconsciously followed Isabel's every move around the restaurant. He had watched her serve other tables with the same discreet professionalism, noticing how she occasionally brought her hand to her lower back when she thought no one was looking, a gesture that revealed the fatigue of standing for hours with the added weight of pregnancy. He had seen how some clients treated her with the casual indifference reserved for service staff, and each instance had made something twist painfully in his chest. When Isabel had approached to clear the dessert plates, Sofia had been talking about a Mediterranean cruise she wanted to invite him on, but Diego had been watching Isabel's profile, the way her eyelashes created small shadows on her cheeks under the candlelight. "Diego?" Sofia had followed his gaze with curiosity. "Do you know that waitress?" "No," Diego had lied, but his voice had sounded strange even to himself. "She just looked familiar." Now, at 11:30 at night, Diego was in the back alley of the restaurant, waiting like a stalker in the shadows. He had escorted Sophia to her taxi with vague excuses about pending work, promising to call her soon, knowing he wouldn't. The alley was a brutal contrast to the elegance of the restaurant's interior. Garbage containers, stacked cardboard boxes, the smell of rotting food mixing with the aroma of cigarettes that some employees smoked during their breaks. The only lights were the yellowish street lamps and the fluorescent light coming from the kitchen's back door. Diego had waited for almost an hour, ignoring the curious glances of the cooks and dishwashers who came out to smoke, when Isabel finally appeared at the door. She had taken off her apron and was wearing a grey wool jacket over her uniform. In her hands she had a faux leather bag that had seen better days and a small umbrella because the clouds were threatening rain. When she saw Diego waiting for her, Isabel stopped in her tracks. For a moment neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like an abyss, filled with 3 years of unspoken words, accumulated reproaches, and a love story that had ended in mutual destruction. "What the hell are you doing here?" Isabel finally asked, her voice a mix of disbelief, tiredness, and something that looked dangerously like panic. Diego stepped out of the shadows, and under the yellowish light of the street lamp, Isabel could see that he had also changed in these 3 years. He was still handsome, devastatingly handsome, but there was something different in his eyes, a kind of emptiness that hadn't been there during their marriage, not even in their worst moments. "I need to talk to you," Diego said, his voice hoarse with the emotion he had been holding in all night. Isabel leaned against the brick wall of the alley, a hand instinctively protecting her prominent belly. It was a maternal gesture that Diego noticed immediately, and that painfully reminded him of all the times they had talked about having children during their marriage, conversations that had always ended with him telling her that it wasn't the right time yet. Under the artificial light, Diego could see the dark circles under her eyes that the professional makeup Isabel had used at the restaurant had not managed to completely disguise. She had lost weight in her face and shoulders, but her belly was prominent and obviously healthy. She looked tired, but there was also something else, a kind of inner strength she hadn't had before, as if adversity had tempered her like steel. "I work here, Diego," Isabel replied with a bitterness that cut the air like a knife. "Some people need to work to live, not for fun." The phrase was like a slap in the face. Diego remembered all the times during their marriage that he had told her she didn't need to work, that her job was to make their house perfect, that he earned enough money for both of them. He remembered how he had discouraged her attempts to go back to teaching, arguing that business dinners and social events required her full attention. And this? Diego pointed to her belly, the words coming out more abruptly than he had intended. Isabel laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was a bitter laugh loaded with irony and pain. This is what's left when you trust the wrong man. Carlos Vasquez, if you're interested in the name, although I doubt you know him. He doesn't move in 800 million euro circles. The name Carlos Vasquez stabbed Diego in the chest like a dagger. It wasn't the man's identity that hurt him, but the way Isabel had said the wrong man, as if Diego had also been a bad choice, as if both were part of a series of unfortunate decisions in Isabel's life. "Isabel." Diego took a step closer, but she raised a hand, stopping him. "No." The word came out with a force that made Diego stop immediately. "You have no right to come here, to look at me as if I were an apparition from your tormented past. You chose your path, Diego. The businesses, the power, the pretty women like your companion tonight. I chose mine. Your path." Diego couldn't contain the disbelief in his voice. "Serving tables 7 months pregnant is your path?" Isabel's eyes lit up with a fury that Diego remembered well, the same fury she had shown on the day of their divorce, but now there was something more, a fierce dignity that poverty and circumstances had not managed to break. "My path is to survive, Diego. My path is to get up every morning at 6, take 2 buses to get to work because I can't afford a car, and stand for 8 hours serving people who treat me as if I were invisible. My path is to work 16 hours a day, to be able to afford a 30-square-meter apartment in Vallecas, because the 120,000 euros you gave me lasted exactly 8 months after I discovered that finding a job without recent references is almost impossible when you've spent 5 years being the trophy wife of a hotel magnate." Each word was like a whip. Diego felt as if he were being flayed alive by the brutality of the reality Isabel was describing. "My path," Isabel continued, her voice now trembling with emotion, is to know I have a child on the way, and that I'm the only person in this world who is going to take care of him. My path is to work until my feet hurt, so I can save enough to buy a second-hand crib, because new cribs cost more than I earn in a week. The silence that followed was deafening. Diego felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under his feet, as if everything he had believed about their divorce, about the way things had separated, had been a comfortable lie he had told himself. Isabel, I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. She pulled away from the wall, facing him directly. When have you ever bothered to know anything about my life after we signed those papers? When have you thought of me as anything other than a problem solved, a closed chapter in the biography of the successful Diego Herrera? Tears had started to roll down Isabel's cheeks, but she kept talking, as if years of forced silence had finally found a way out. Do you know what it was like to realize I had no one to call when I found out I was pregnant? Do you know what it was like to discover that Carlos had a wife and children, that I had only been an affair for him, just as I was probably only a phase for you? That's not true. Of course it's true, Isabel shouted. If I had meant something real to you, you would have fought for our marriage. You would have chosen to spend a single night with me instead of with your Japanese investors. You would have remembered our anniversary at least once in 5 years without your secretary reminding you. Diego opened his mouth to protest, but realized he had no arguments. Isabel was right in every accusation. Ms. Morales, the restaurant manager's voice cut the tension like a knife. Your break ended 10 minutes ago. Isabel straightened up immediately, wiping her tears with the back of her hand and regaining that dignity that neither poverty nor abandonment had managed to break. I'm coming, Mr. Martinez. Her voice returned to a professional tone, as if she were capable of splitting into two people. The broken woman who had just confronted her ex-husband and the responsible employee who needed to keep her job. She headed toward the door but stopped without turning, her shoulders tense under the wool jacket. Goodbye, Diego. This time for real. But as the door closed behind her with a slam that echoed in the alley like a final door slam, Diego knew with a certainty that terrified him that this time he couldn't just let her go. Not when he had seen the raw pain in her eyes, not when he had realized the magnitude of what his coldness and negligence had caused. What devastating secrets were hidden behind Isabel's new life? How had she really come to this situation? And what would Diego have to do to repair years of emotional damage and abandonment? Diego didn't sleep that night, nor the next. From his penthouse on the Castellana, a luxury duplex on the 45th floor with panoramic views of all of Madrid, he watched the city lights blink like fallen stars. But his mind was trapped in a dirty back alley with a woman who had once been his whole world. The apartment, designed by one of Europe's most prestigious architects, seemed like a mausoleum that night. The Italian designer furniture, the contemporary art pieces that had cost more than an average house, the state-of-the-art kitchen he never used because he always ate at restaurants or ordered takeout, all seemed empty of meaning. He had showered 3 times, trying to wash away the feeling of moral dirt that had invaded him after the confrontation with Isabel. He had tried to work, review contracts, analyze financial reports, but the words blurred on the page, replaced by the image of Isabel pregnant, tired, serving tables to survive. At 5 in the morning, he surrendered to the reality that he wouldn't be able to rest until he knew the complete truth about what had happened in Isabel's life during these 3 years. He dressed in one of his most serious suits, a dark grey Brioni that had cost him €8,000, and headed to his office 2 hours earlier than usual. Cristina, I need you to do something for me, he told his executive assistant the moment she arrived at 7:30 in the morning. Cristina Ruiz had spent 5 years managing his schedule, his most delicate secrets, and his most confidential matters with the efficiency of a Swiss watch and the discretion of a confessor. At 38, she was an intelligent and observant woman who had learned to read Diego's moods better than a seismograph reads the tremors of the earth. A single glance at her boss's face told her that something had changed drastically in the last 24 hours. Of course, Mr. Herrera, what do you need? Diego stood up from his chair and walked to the window, unable to maintain eye contact as he made the request he knew crossed ethical lines, but that he needed to make anyway. I want you to investigate Isabel Morales, my ex-wife. I want to know everything, where she lives, how she lives, what she does, how much she earns, who she associates with, her medical situation, her financial situation. Everything, Christina. And I want it by first thing tomorrow morning. Christina didn't bat an eye. She had worked for powerful men long enough to know that sometimes power was used for purposes that didn't appear in business ethics books. But she saw something in Diego's eyes that she had never seen before. Real vulnerability, almost desperation. Should I use a particular investigation agency? Use the best, Hernandez and Asociados. Tell them it's top priority and that money is not an issue. I want a complete report. Medical history if possible. Financial records, jobs, personal relationships, everything they can legally find. Christina nodded, taking notes on her iPad with the efficiency that characterized all her movements. One more thing, Diego added. Absolute discretion. No one else can know about this investigation. No one. Understood, Mr. Herrera. The next 24 hours were the longest in Diego's professional life. He tried to maintain his normal routine. Meetings with investors, reviewing proposals for new hotels, a conference call with his partners in Barcelona about the expansion to Valencia. But his mind was constantly distracted, wondering what the investigation would reveal, fearing what he might discover. Exactly 24 hours later, Christina entered his office with an expression Diego had never seen on her, a mixture of professional concern and what appeared to be genuine compassion. The report is ready, Mr. Herrera. She placed a 40-page dossier on the mahogany desk. The cover, printed on high-quality paper with the investigation agency's logo, simply said, Isabel Morales Fernandez, full confidential report. Diego looked at the file as if it were a bomb about to explode. Did you read the contents? Only an executive summary, as is protocol. Mr. Herrera... Christina hesitated, something completely out of character for her. Perhaps you should be alone when you read it. Those words confirmed Diego's worst fears. With hands that trembled slightly, he opened the file and began to read. With each line, he felt as if liquid lead had been poured into his veins. Basic personal information. Full name, Isabel Morales Fernandez, age, 36 years, marital status, divorced children, none currently, current pregnancy of 32 weeks. Current address, Calle Peña Gorbea, 15, 4th left, Vallecas Villa, Madrid. Type of housing, one-bedroom apartment, 32 square meters. Condition, rented monthly rent, €650. Note, the building dates from 1978. No elevator. The apartment is on the 4th floor. Deficient central heating. No air conditioning. Employment situation. Main job, waitress at Restaurante El Jardín, Salamanca neighborhood. Salary, €18 per hour. Gross. Schedule, 40 hours per week distributed over 5 days. Time in position, 14 months monthly income from main job, €2,180 before taxes. Net monthly income, approximately €2,200. Secondary job, house cleaning on weekends in private homes in Salamanca, Chamberí and Las Rosas. Rate, €15 per hour. Average weekly hours, 12-15 hours on Saturdays and Sundays. Additional monthly income, €720-900. Post-divorce work. History. Attempted to resume art teaching immediately after the divorce. Without recent references, she had stopped working in 2018. She was unable to get a position in private schools. Worked as a saleswoman at El Corte Inglés for 6 months, laid off due to restructuring. Worked as a receptionist at a dental clinic for 4 months, insufficient salary to cover basic expenses. Started house cleaning out of economic desperation. Got a position at El Jardín through a contact of one of her cleaning clients. Diego had to stop. His hands were trembling so much that the letters blurred on the page. The woman who had been his wife, who had lived in a 500-square-meter mansion in La Moraleja, who had had domestic staff and a private chauffeur, now climbed 4 flights of stairs every day to an apartment that was smaller than her previous walk-in closet. He took a deep breath and continued reading, although each line was like receiving stabs. Current medical situation. Pregnancy. 32 weeks gestation. Estimated due date. 1st week of December. Health status. Normal pregnancy, although she shows signs of stress and extreme fatigue. Medical care. Public health system. Switched from private due to lack of financial resources. Medical center. Centro de Salud Villablanca, Vallecas. Pregnancy situation. Biological father. Carlos Vasquez Mendoza, 42 years old. Biological father's profession: bank branch manager, biological. Father's marital status: married, 2 minor children. Relationship status abruptly ended when Mr. Vasquez found out about the pregnancy. He does not maintain contact with Ms. Morales. He provides no financial support. Investigative note: according to testimonies from co-workers, Mr. Vasquez had completely hidden his marital status. Ms. Morales discovered he was married when she tried to contact him to tell him about the pregnancy. Mr. Vasquez explicitly asked her not to go ahead with the pregnancy and threatened to deny any responsibility if she made it public. Diego felt such intense anger that he had to get up and walk to the window to control himself. The idea that Isabel had been deceived and then abandoned by a coward who hadn't had the courage to face the consequences of his actions made him want to find Carlos Vasquez and destroy him. But the worst was yet to come. Current financial situation: current savings €1,247. Outstanding debts €374 distributed as follows. Private gynecologist, consulted before switching to public, €1,200. Pharmacy, medications and prenatal vitamins, €456. Baby preparations, second-hand crib, clothes, diapers, €890. Credit cards, emergency expenses during pregnancy, €1,328. Monthly expenses: rent, €650. Basic utilities, €120. Public transport, €54. Food, €200. Drastically reduced to save money. Medical expenses, €80 average. Other basic expenses, €100. Total monthly expenses, €1,204. Income versus expenses. With her 2 jobs, Isabel generates approximately €2,900 to €3,100 per month, of which she saves between €1,700 to €1,900 per month to prepare for the baby's arrival and maternity leave. Social network and support: family, parents deceased, 2019, traffic accident. She was an only child. Friends: the investigation reveals that she lost contact with most of her friends during the marriage, as her social lifestyle revolved entirely around Mr. Herrera's professional commitments. Post-divorce attempts to reconnect were unsuccessful due to differences in socio-economic status. Current support network: practically non-existent. She maintains cordial but superficial relationships with some co-workers. Additional medical information: emergency contact. Reference hospital: Hospital Clínico San Carlos. Registered emergency contact: Diego Herrera, Mr. Emergency contact. Phone number: Diego's number. Diego stopped completely upon reading that last line. He had to read it 3 times to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. After 3 years of total silence, after all the cruel words exchanged during the divorce, after he had treated her like an inconvenience to be rid of, Isabel had put his name down as the only person to call if something happened to her or the baby. He closed the file with trembling hands and fell back into his Italian leather chair that cost more than Isabel earned in 2 months. The woman who had once owned his heart was alone, completely alone, pregnant, working herself to exhaustion to survive, living in an apartment that was a fraction of the size of the master bathroom in their old house, and he had been dining in luxury restaurants without knowing that she was cleaning the bathrooms of people like him to make ends meet. But what most devastated him was realizing that, despite everything, despite the pain and bitterness, Isabel still trusted him enough to put him down as her emergency contact. In her most vulnerable moment, when she had no one else in the world, she had written his name on a medical form as the person who would take care of her if something went wrong. What could he do with this devastating information that confirmed that he had been not only a bad husband, but also a despicable human being? And how could he ever redeem the damage that his coldness, his selfishness, and his emotional cowardice had caused? Diego spent 3 days locked in his office, reading and rereading the report until every detail was permanently etched in his memory. Each figure was like a stab. Isabel buying baby clothes in second-hand shops, while he spent thousands on bottles of wine he didn't even taste. Isabel walking from Vallecas to the center because she couldn't afford public transport every day, while he had 3 luxury cars waiting in his penthouse garage. Isabel eating once a day to save money for her baby, while he threw away expensive food because he had lost his appetite. During those 3 days, he cancelled all his meetings, ignored calls from business partners, and turned down 3 invitations to gala dinners. Christina had begun to look at him with increasing concern, especially after finding him asleep at his desk on the second morning, still dressed in the suit from the day before. "Mr. Herrera," she said softly, "maybe you should go home. Get some rest." "I'm fine, Christina," he had lied, although both of them knew it wasn't true. On the 4th day, exactly 72 hours after first reading the report, Diego made a decision that would change the course of both their lives forever. He showered in his private office bathroom, put on his best suit, a navy Armani that Isabel had always said brought out his eyes, and headed straight for El Jardín. It was Tuesday, 2 in the afternoon, the quietest time of the lunch service. The restaurant was practically empty, with only 3 tables occupied by diners enjoying late business lunches. Diego could hear the murmur of discreet conversations, mingling with the soft clinking of cutlery against porcelain. Isabel was cleaning a table near the windows overlooking the Paseo de la Castellana when she saw him enter. Her eyes immediately hardened, and Diego could see her shoulders tense, as if she were preparing for a confrontation. "You can't be here, Diego," she said without looking directly at him, continuing with her task of folding linen napkins with precise professional movements. "I need to talk to you." "I'm working." Isabel moved to another table, clearly trying to avoid any personal conversation during work hours. Diego followed her, aware that the few people in the restaurant had started to notice the tension between them. The maître d', an elegant man in his 50s whom Diego recognized from his many dinners there, was approaching with a worried expression. "Isabel, I know where you live." Diego lowered his voice, but maintained the intensity. "I know you clean houses on weekends in Salamanca and Las Rosas. I know Carlos abandoned you when he found out about the pregnancy. I know you have no one else in this world, and I know you put me down as your emergency medical contact." Isabel stopped abruptly, her hands freezing over the water glass she was filling. The water overflowed slightly, creating a small puddle on the white tablecloth. "You've been investigating me?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but Diego could detect a mix of horror, betrayal, and contained fury. "How dare you?" The maître d' reached them, clearly uncomfortable with the situation unfolding in his elegant establishment. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, with the trained diplomacy of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations with important clients. "No problem." Diego kept his eyes fixed on Isabel. "I just need a few minutes to speak with Ms. Morales." "Sir, I'm afraid we can't allow the service to be interrupted." Diego took out his wallet, extracted 10 €500 bills, and placed them on the table Isabel had just cleaned. The money represented more than Isabel earned in an entire month. €5,000. For 10 minutes of privacy with her. The maître d' looked at the bills, then at Diego, then at Isabel, clearly calculating whether it was worth the risk of offending one of his most important clients to protect an employee. "No," Isabel interjected, her voice now strong and clear. "I am not a commodity that can be bought with money. If you want to talk to me, you can wait until my shift is over, like any civilized person." Diego saw something in her eyes that hit him like a revelation. Isabel was no longer the submissive woman she had been during their marriage. Adversity had changed her, made her stronger, more independent, more self-assured. Paradoxically, she was more attractive now than she had ever been. "You're right." Diego picked up the money, putting it back in his wallet. "That was wrong. I apologize." Isabel looked at him with genuine surprise. In 5 years of marriage, she had never heard Diego admit a mistake so quickly and completely. "But I need you to know something," Diego continued. "You put me down as your emergency medical contact. After all we said to each other, after all the hatred we expressed, after 3 years of total silence, you still trust me to take care of you if something happens." Isabel felt tears threatening to well up, but she held them back with that inner strength she had developed during the most difficult months of her life. "I had no one else," she whispered, and those 4 words contained more pain than any scream could have expressed. "Exactly." Diego took a step closer, but stopped when he saw Isabel instinctively back away. "And I'm not going to let you be alone anymore. I'm not going to let my child be born into a world where his mother has to choose between eating and paying rent. He's not your son, Diego. He could be. I want him to be." The silence that followed was so intense that Diego could hear his own heart beating. The few people in the restaurant had stopped pretending they weren't paying attention to the conversation, and several had taken out their phones, probably recording what seemed to be a scene straight out of a telenovela. Isabel looked at him intently, searching his eyes for any sign that this was just another power game, another calculated manipulation. But what she saw surprised her. Real vulnerability, genuine fear, and something she hadn't seen in years: humility. "Do you know what happened to me after our divorce, Diego?" Isabel began to speak in a low but firm voice. "I didn't just lose my marriage. I lost my complete identity. For 5 years, I was Mrs. Herrera. I was your wife, your companion, your hostess. I was never myself." Diego wanted to interrupt, explain, apologize, but something in Isabel's expression told him he needed to hear this. "When I tried to find a job, I realized I didn't know who Isabel Morales was. I had no recent work references, no updated marketable skills, no professional contacts of my own. Everything I had was connected to you, and when we divorced, I lost access to that entire world." Isabel put a hand to her belly, a gesture that had become automatic during the pregnancy. "Do you know what it's like to realize you're completely dependent on someone who no longer loves you? Do you know what it's like to discover that you've sacrificed so much of yourself for a marriage that ended up being just an illusion?" "It wasn't an illusion," Diego said softly. "At least not for me. It was real, Isabel. My love for you was the most real thing I've ever felt in my life. The problem is that I didn't know how to show it. I didn't know how to prioritize it over everything else." Isabel studied his face, looking for signs of the calculated manipulation she knew so well. But there was something different about Diego, something that hadn't been there during their marriage, a raw honesty that seemed to come from a very deep place of pain and regret. "If this is real, Diego, if you really want to be here, I need you to understand that it can't be like before. You can't show up when it's convenient for you and disappear when you have an important board meeting or a more attractive business opportunity." "I understand." "No, you don't understand," Isabel interrupted him with the firmness she had learned from months of fighting alone. "During our marriage, I was always secondary. Your hotels, your investments, your meetings with investors, your networking dinners, everything was more important than me. If we're going to try anything at all, I need to know that I will be your priority, that this baby will be your real, not theoretical priority." Diego nodded, but Isabel wasn't finished. "This baby is not yours biologically. If you decide to be his father, you have to understand that it's forever. You can't change your mind in 6 months when you realize that fatherhood is difficult, or in 2 years when you see other men living freer lives. You can't disappear when things get complicated, when the baby is sick, when you haven't slept in weeks, when our life becomes mundane and real instead of romantic and idealized." "I want to be his father," Diego said without hesitation, with a conviction that surprised even himself. "I want to be there when he takes his first steps, when he says his first word, when he goes to his first day of school, when he graduates, when he gets married, when he has his own children. Everything, Isabel, I want everything." Isabel studied his face for a long moment, and Diego felt as if he were being subjected to the most important test of his life. "And what about your lifestyle? The models like your companion last night, the gala dinners until 3 in the morning, the spontaneous business trips to Paris or New York." "Sofia Montenegro was the last one," Diego said, with a firmness that made Isabel look at him more intently. "I swear it on what I hold most dear in this world. Since I saw you in this restaurant 4 nights ago, I haven't been able to think about anyone else. I haven't been able to eat. I haven't been able to sleep. I haven't been able to focus on anything other than the horror of what I did to you during our marriage, and what has happened to you since." Isabel felt a strong kick, as if the baby was reacting to the emotional intensity of the conversation. "He's kicking," she murmured, placing both hands on her belly. "Can I?" Diego extended his hand timidly, with an expression of longing so intense that it made something soften in Isabel's heart. Isabel thought about it for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then slowly she took Diego's hand and guided it to where she had felt the strongest movement. Immediately, as if the baby knew there was a new important presence, he kicked again directly against Diego's palm, followed by what seemed to be a small fist pushing against his hand. Diego gasped. His eyes filled with tears that he didn't try to hide. tears that the few diners in the restaurant watched with fascination. The most powerful hotel magnate in Madrid was crying in public, completely vulnerable from the contact with an unborn baby. "My God, Isabel, he's real. He's really real." Diego kept his hand on her belly, feeling every little movement like small miracles. "It's incredible. He's perfect. Yes, he's real. And in less than 2 months, he's going to be here, needing us to be the best parents we can be, needing stability, security, unconditional love." Diego kept his hand on her belly for several more minutes, completely absorbed in the baby's movements. When he finally looked up at Isabel, there was something different in his eyes, a determination that went beyond desire or guilt, something that resembled true purpose. "How are we going to do this?" Isabel asked softly, her voice filled with cautious hope. "One day at a time," Diego replied. "But together. This time, really together." That night, for the first time in 3 years, Isabel fell asleep, feeling less alone in her small apartment in Vallecas. But would Diego and Isabel be able to overcome years of resentment, pain, and destructive patterns to build something new and genuine? Or were they doomed to repeat the mistakes that had destroyed their marriage the first time? In the 2 weeks that followed that confrontation at El Jardín, Diego Herrera did something that no one in the Spanish corporate world expected. He completely changed his life in ways that seemed impossible for a man who had built his entire identity around business success. "Cancel all my meetings for the next 2 weeks, he told Cristina on Monday morning, after having spent the entire weekend researching pregnancy, fetal development, and preparing for fatherhood with the obsession of someone who had discovered a new universe. "All of them?" Cristina looked at him as if he had lost his mind. "Sir, you have the meeting with the Japanese investors you've been planning for 6 months. They have to decide on the €200 million investment for the expansion to Asia. Delegate it to Rodriguez. It's time for him to learn to handle important things without me. There's also the presentation for the Seville project, the quarterly board meeting, and the dinner with the Minister of Tourism. Everything to Rodriguez or Martinez. Cristina, I have more important things to do." Cristina looked at him with an expression that mixed professional concern with personal curiosity. In 5 years of working for Diego, she had never seen him cancel an important meeting, let alone delegate responsibilities he considered fundamental to his control of the business empire. "May I ask what is more important than a €200 million investment?" Diego stood up from his desk and walked to the window, watching Madrid spread out under the grey November sky. "Learning to be a father, Cristina. Learning to be the man I should have been 3 years ago." That afternoon, Diego appeared at Isabel's apartment door with his hands full of bags from El Corte Inglés, prenatal, and several pharmacies. He had spent 4 hours buying everything that his obsessive Google searches had told him a newborn would need. Isabel opened the door in a housecoat, having clearly just woken up from a nap her pregnant body had demanded. The apartment behind her was exactly as Diego had imagined it after reading the report. Tiny, clean but worn, with second-hand furniture that someone had cared for lovingly, but that had clearly seen better days. "What is all this?" she asked, looking at the multiple bags Diego was carrying as if he were a Sherpa climbing Everest. "Things for the baby. And for you." Diego entered without waiting for an invitation, a habit from years of being welcomed anywhere without question. But he stopped immediately when he realized what he had done. "So I'm sorry, I should have asked if I could come in." Isabel closed the door behind him, watching him begin to take items out of the bags like an excited child at Christmas. Diapers of different sizes, tiny clothes in neutral shades of yellow and green, a baby monitor that seemed more sophisticated than some medical equipment, prenatal vitamins from the most expensive brand on the market, a portable crib, organic cotton blankets, glass bottles free of chemicals. "Diego, this must have cost thousands of euros." €5,600 and 43 cents to be exact, Diego continued, taking out items. "And it's worth every cent if it makes your life a little easier." Isabel sat down heavily on her small second-hand sofa, which she had bought at a flea market in Vallecas, watching Diego transform her modest living room into an explosion of luxury baby items. "Diego, I don't need you to buy me things. I need to know you're going to be here when things get difficult." Diego stopped in the process of assembling what looked like a baby bouncer and looked at her directly. Isabel, I want to do things right this time. I want to be present for everything. And if that means learning to assemble cribs, change diapers, and get up every 2 hours to prepare bottles, then that's what I'm going to do. The next few days were a revelation for both of them. Diego appeared every morning at 7, when Isabel woke up for her morning routine, carrying breakfasts from the most expensive bakery in Madrid that he had learned to find during his sleepless night walks. But what most surprised Isabel was his dedication to learning about pregnancy and fatherhood, with the same intensity he had once dedicated to studying financial markets. Diego had bought 15 books on child development, subscribed to pregnancy tracking apps, and had started asking questions that showed he had been obsessively researching. "Are you feeling Braxton Hicks contractions yet?" he asked one morning while preparing a breakfast that looked like it came from a 5-star hotel. "How do you know about Braxton Hicks contractions?" "I read that they're normal after week 30, but you should consult the doctor if they become regular or painful." Diego served her scrambled eggs with smoked salmon and avocado. "I also read that you should be taking more omega-3 for the baby's brain development." Isabel looked at him with a mixture of awe and amusement. "You read all that?" "Last night, and the night before, and the night before that." "Isabel, I haven't slept more than 3 hours straight since I saw you again. Every time I close my eyes, I think about everything I don't know about being a father, about everything I need to learn so I don't fail this baby the way I failed you." The moment of truth came when Isabel had her scheduled medical appointment at the public health center. Diego had insisted on accompanying her, but Isabel had been skeptical about how he would react to the environment, so different from the luxury private hospitals she had known during their marriage. The Centro de Salud Villablanca in Vallecas was the exact opposite of the Clínica La Luz where Isabel had received medical care during their marriage. The waiting room chairs were orange plastic, many with cracks repaired with duct tape. Public health posters were pinned to the walls, some with peeling corners. The smell was a mixture of industrial disinfectant and vending machine coffee. Diego, dressed in one of his €3,000 suits, stood out like a diamond in a handful of pebbles. But what surprised Isabel was his behavior. He sat patiently in one of the plastic chairs, made no comment about the facilities, and struck up a friendly conversation with an elderly woman waiting for her cardiology appointment. "Is it your first baby?" the elderly woman asked her, noticing Isabel's prominent belly. "Yes," Isabel replied, but Diego gently interrupted. "Our first baby," he corrected, naturally taking Isabel's hand. "And we're very excited." When it was Isabel's turn, the gynecologist, Dr. Fernandez, a woman in her 50s with gray hair tied back in a practical ponytail and a white coat that had seen better days, came out to get them. "Mrs. Morales," she said, consulting her folder. "Is this the father?" Isabel and Diego exchanged quick glances. In all the months of her pregnancy, Isabel had come alone to the appointments, explaining that the father was unavailable. Diego's presence completely changed the dynamic. "Yes," Diego said firmly, getting up to shake the doctor's hand. "I'm Diego. I apologize for not being able to come to the previous appointments. Work problems, but that's going to change." "Doctor." Fernandez led them to a small room where the examination table was covered with paper that crackled, and the ultrasound equipment seemed to have been built in the 1990s. Diego observed everything without making any verbal comparisons to the luxury medical facilities he knew, but Isabel knew he was noticing the differences. During the ultrasound, Diego saw his son's face for the first time on the black and white screen. The image was blurry, pixelated, very different from the HD images they would have gotten at a private clinic, but Diego was completely hypnotized. "He's in a perfect position for birth," the doctor explained, moving the probe over Isabel's belly. "Head down, estimated weight of about 3 kilograms and 200 grams. All the measurements are within normal parameters." "Is he—" Diego swallowed. "Is he healthy? Is everything developing correctly?" "Completely healthy." "A beautiful baby," the doctor smiled. "Do you want to know the sex?" Isabel and Diego looked at each other. "What do you prefer?" Isabel asked. "A surprise," Diego smiled. "But healthy is all that matters." That night, for the first time since his reappearance in Isabel's life, Diego didn't go back to his penthouse. He stayed in Isabel's small apartment, sleeping on the uncomfortable sofa that was too short for his height. waking up every time she got up to go to the bathroom, which happened approximately every hour due to the baby's pressure on her bladder. "You don't have to stay," Isabel told him at 3 in the morning, finding him awake in the darkness of the tiny living room. "Yes, I do have to stay," Diego replied. "This is my place now, with you, with our baby. This 30-square-meter apartment is more of a home than I've had in years." Isabel sat on the edge of the sofa, and Diego sat up to make room. In the dark, they could hear each other breathing, the sound of the central heating fighting the November cold, and occasionally the distant traffic noise from the Gran Via de las Corras. "Can you really be happy with this?" Isabel asked softly. "With a normal life, with normal problems, with a baby who is going to cry at 3 in the morning and who isn't going to care if you have an important meeting at 8? Diego leaned toward her, taking her hand in the dark. "Isabel, I've had all the money a man could want. I've had power, influence, properties, luxury cars, trips around the world. And you know what? I woke up every morning feeling empty. The only time I've ever felt truly alive, truly complete, has been with you. And now the idea of waking up every morning knowing I have a family that needs me, that loves me not for what I have but for who I am, that is more valuable than all the 5-star hotels in the world." But would Diego really be able to maintain this level of commitment when the novelty wore off and he faced the exhausting everyday reality of being a father, or did he still have more difficult tests to face? A week after the medical appointment, Diego made a decision that shook the foundations of the Madrid business world like a financial earthquake. He was sitting in his office in the Torre Picasso at 6 in the morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in orange and pink tones over the rooftops of Madrid, when he called his personal lawyer. "Martín, I need you to draft my resignation as executive CEO of Herrera Hospitality." The silence on the other end of the line lasted for almost 30 seconds. "Diego, it's 6 in the morning. Are you sure you've thought this through completely? I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks without sleeping. I want to maintain my position as chairman of the board, but the daily management goes to Rodriguez immediately. May I ask why you're making this decision now?" "The company is at its most successful moment." Diego stood up and walked to the window, watching the first people walk down the streets, probably heading to jobs they hated to support families they loved. "Because I just realized that I've been building an empire to impress people I don't care about, while ignoring the only person I did care about." That same morning, Diego appeared at Isabel's apartment with a proposal that left her speechless. "I want you to quit your job," he said as she prepared for another exhausting day at El Jardín. Isabel stopped in the process of putting on her work shoes, simple black shoes she had bought at a discount store because they were the only thing she could afford to stand in for 8 hours straight. "Pardon? I want you to quit the restaurant and the cleaning job on weekends. I want you to focus on your health, on the pregnancy, on preparing for when the baby is born." Isabel finished tying her shoes and straightened up carefully, a hand on her lower back. "Diego, I can't just quit working. I have expenses, I have debts. I have to save for maternity leave." "You no longer have debts." Diego took a folder of documents from his briefcase. "I paid off your private gynecologist, your credit cards, your medical expenses, everything. And I deposited 50,000 euros into your account to cover any expenses until the baby is at least 6 months old." Isabel stood still, processing what she had just heard. "I can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because I don't want to be your kept woman again. I don't want to be the woman who is financially dependent on Diego Herrera to survive again." Diego approached her, but maintained a respectful distance. "You wouldn't be my kept woman. You would be the mother of my child, resting as an 8-month pregnant woman should rest instead of working 16 hours a day, because one jerk abandoned her while pregnant and another jerk abandoned her emotionally for 5 years. Isabel felt tears pricking her eyes, but she fought them back. "It's not that simple, Diego." "Why not?" "Because if I accept your money, if I quit working, if I let you solve all my financial problems, then what happens if you decide in 3 months that this isn't what you wanted? What happens if you get bored of playing the perfect family and go back to your old life?" The question fell between them like a bomb. Diego realized that Isabel wasn't just being proud, she was being intelligently cautious based on painful experiences. "What do you need to trust that this is real?" Isabel sat down at her small kitchen table. which also served as a desk, dining table, and work surface for everything in the tiny apartment. Time, consistency, proof that you can maintain this commitment when it's not new and exciting, when it's routine and difficult. Diego sat across from her in the only other chair in the apartment. Okay, then I'll start by proving that I can adapt to your life, not the other way around. That afternoon, Diego did something he had never done in his 42 years of life. He took the subway. He got on line 1 at Gran Via, traveled to Portazgo, and walked the 15 minutes to Isabel's apartment in Vallecas, experiencing the Madrid that thousands of people lived every day, but that he had never known. The subway was crowded with people returning from work, mothers with tired small children, men in construction uniforms who smelled of cement and sweat, students with heavy backpacks, elderly people carrying shopping bags from discount supermarkets. Diego, dressed in one of his designer suits but without a tie, tried to go unnoticed, but his presence still drew attention. Not because people recognized him, but because there was something in his posture, in the quality of his clothes, in his soft hands that had never done physical labor, that marked him as someone who didn't belong in that world. When he arrived at Isabel's apartment, she had already returned from work and was preparing a simple dinner, pasta with tomato sauce and a small salad. "How did you get here?" she asked, noticing that Diego hadn't used his usual chauffeur. "Subway and walking. Line 1 to Portazgo, 15-minute walk. 29 minutes in total from Gran Via." Isabel looked at him with genuine surprise. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to be a part of your life, I need to understand how you really live. I need to know your world, not expect you to adapt to mine." During dinner, eating store-brand pasta on chipped but clean plates, Diego experienced something he hadn't felt in years: normalcy. There were no waiters waiting to satisfy every whim, no conversations about business mergers or international markets, no pressure to impress or dominate, just him, Isabel, and the simple conversation about how each other's day had been. "My boss asked if I knew the man who came to the restaurant asking to speak with me," Isabel said as she served more pasta. "I told him you were my ex-husband." "What did he say?" "That you seemed important, rich. That he didn't understand what you were doing with a pregnant waitress." Diego put his fork down on the plate. "And what did you tell him?" "That I didn't completely understand it either." That night, Diego slept on the uncomfortable sofa again, but this time he had brought a blanket from his house and a pillow. Isabel had protested, saying he could go to his penthouse and come back in the morning, but Diego had insisted. "If I'm going to be this baby's father, I need to be here when it's uncomfortable, when it's difficult, when it's not glamorous. Dads don't just show up for the fun parts." At 2 a.m, Isabel woke up with strong back pains, something that had been happening more frequently as the baby grew. Normally she would get up alone, take a hot shower, and try to stretch her muscles until the pain eased. But this time, when she sat up with difficulty, she found Diego immediately awake. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "Just back pain. It's normal at this stage of the pregnancy." Isabel tried to get up on her own, but Diego was already by her side. "Is there something I can do?" Isabel looked at him in the darkness, lit only by the street lamplight filtering through the small apartment window. "Do you know how to give massages?" "No, but I can learn." For the next 30 minutes, Diego carefully massaged Isabel's back, following her instructions on where to press and with how much force. His hands, accustomed to signing contracts and shaking hands in power meetings, now worked with delicacy to relieve the physical pain of the woman he loved. "Better," Isabel murmured, when the pain finally eased. "Does this happen every night?" 2 or 3 times a week. "The baby is pressing on nerves I didn't know I had." Diego helped her lie down again, arranging pillows to support her belly and her back. "From now on, you wake me up when it happens. You don't have to deal with this alone." As Isabel fell asleep, Diego remained awake, watching her profile in the dark and feeling more useful, more needed, more complete than he had ever felt running multi-million-dollar meetings. But would he be able to maintain this complete dedication when the baby arrived and the sleepless nights became routine? Or did he still have more difficult tests to face? 3 weeks later, at 3:47 on a December morning that had begun like any other, Isabel woke up drenched in a warm liquid that she immediately recognized as different from any other pregnancy discomfort. "Diego." She shook him gently, but urgently. In recent weeks, He had practically moved into the apartment, sleeping on the sofa without ever complaining about the discomfort, waking up every time she needed to get up to go to the bathroom, helping her with massages when the back pain became unbearable. "Diego, I think my water broke." Diego sat up immediately, completely alert as if he had been waiting for this moment for weeks. "Are you sure?" "Very sure." Isabel grimaced when she felt the first real contraction, different from the Braxton Hicks contractions she had been experiencing. "And I think it's coming fast." In the next few minutes, Diego demonstrated an efficiency that would have impressed any of his most competent executives. He already had the hospital bag packed for 2 weeks, something he had learned from his obsessive Google searches on birth preparation. He had the emergency taxi number programmed into his phone, and he had memorized the fastest route to the Hospital Clínico San Carlos. "Breathe, love. Breathe with me," he said, as he helped Isabel get dressed in comfortable clothes, timing the contractions with an app he had downloaded. "The contractions are 4 minutes apart. We have time, but we need to move." The taxi arrived in less than 5 minutes, and during the 25-minute ride through the empty streets of Madrid, Diego kept Isabel calm, holding her hand as she breathed through the progressively intensifying contractions. "I'm scared, Diego," Isabel admitted when a particularly strong contraction made her gasp. "Me too." Diego kissed her forehead. "But we're going to do it together, okay? You, me, and our baby, who is impatient to meet us." At the hospital, Diego filled out all the forms with an efficiency that surprised the medical staff, while Isabel was taken directly to the delivery room. When the admission nurse asked his relationship with the patient, he didn't hesitate for a second. "I'm her husband. And the baby's father." The nurse, a woman in her 50s with grey hair in a professional bun, looked at him over her glasses, noticing that Isabel wasn't wearing a wedding ring and that the last names on the documents didn't match. But the urgency of the situation and the absolute determination in Diego's voice made her decide that the bureaucratic details could be sorted out later. "Room 302. You can accompany her throughout the process if she agrees." The next 8 hours were the longest, most intense, and most transformative in Diego's life. He saw Isabel fight with a pain he couldn't relieve, hold her hand as she pushed with a strength she didn't know she possessed, witnessing the fierce determination of a woman who was bringing life into the world with a bravery that left him humbled and in awe. During the first hour, the contractions were manageable, and Diego and Isabel were able to talk between them. "Are you sure you want to be here?" Isabel asked him during a break between contractions. "This is going to get a lot more intense." "There's nowhere else in the world I'd rather be." Diego stroked her hair. "This is the most important moment of our lives. Of course I want to be here." As the hours passed, the pain intensified to levels Diego hadn't imagined possible. He saw Isabel sweat, cry, cling to his hand so hard he thought she would break his bones. But she never complained, never asked to give up. "I can't do it anymore," Isabel said around the 6th hour, exhausted and desperate. "I can't keep doing this." "Yes, you can." Diego held her face in his hands. "You are the strongest woman I have ever known in my life. You've overcome abandonment, poverty, loneliness, being pregnant alone. If you can overcome all of that, you can do this. Our son is waiting to meet the incredible woman who is his mother." Dr. Martinez, who had replaced Dr. Fernandez for the delivery, was a young woman with steady hands and a calm voice who had guided Isabel through the most difficult stages of labor. "I can see the head," she announced at 11:23 in the morning. "One more contraction, Isabel. Give me everything you've got." Isabel looked at Diego with eyes full of tears, pain, exhaustion, but also with a determination that reminded him why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. "Are you ready to meet your son?" she asked him. "I've been ready my whole life without knowing it." Diego kissed her forehead. "Let's bring our baby into the world." With a scream that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul, a scream of pain but also of triumph, Isabel pushed one more time. And then, at 11:24 in the morning on a Tuesday in December, with snow beginning to fall softly over Madrid, Mateo Herrera came into the world. The cry that filled the room was the most beautiful sound Diego had ever heard. Mateo Herrera had been born weighing 3 kilograms and 200 grams, covered in vernix as a natural protection. With his eyes closed, but his fists already clenched, loudly protesting about being taken from his warm and safe refuge. "Does Dad want to cut the cord?" the doctor asked, holding out a pair of scissors to Diego. Diego took the scissors with hands trembling from emotion, not nerves. His eyes were full of tears that he didn't bother to hide, as he physically cut the last link between Isabel and the baby, symbolically marking the moment Mateo officially became his son, not by blood, but by choice and love. "Hello, little one," Diego whispered, when the nurse put the clean baby wrapped in a soft blue blanket in his arms for the first time. "I'm your dad. I've been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it." Mateo opened his eyes for a moment, as if he were evaluating this man who spoke with such a soft and loving voice, and Diego swore he saw something like recognition in that hazy but intense gaze. Isabel, exhausted but radiant with the glow that only new mothers possess, watched the scene from the hospital bed with a mixture of relief, happiness, and something that resembled amazement. For the first time in almost a year, since she had found out she was pregnant and Carlos had abandoned her, she didn't feel alone. The image of Diego holding their son with such tenderness, such reverence, such instantaneous and unconditional love was something she had never imagined possible when she was crying alone in this same hospital during the first few months of ultrasounds. "What are we going to name him?" the nurse asked, preparing to fill out the birth certificate. Isabel and Diego looked at each other. They had vaguely discussed names over the last few weeks, but had never reached a final decision. "Mateo," Diego said without hesitation. "Mateo Herrera." "Herrera?" Isabel looked at him surprised, though not unpleasantly. "If you're going to let me be his father, I want him to have my last name. I want the world to know that he is my son, that I am his dad, that I'm going to take care of him forever." Isabel nodded, too emotional to speak, but her smile told Diego everything he needed to know. But could this small miracle really heal all the wounds of the past, or was it just the beginning of a new series of challenges that would test Diego's commitment in ways he couldn't yet imagine? The first 3 months of Mateo's life were a complete revelation for Diego, an intensive education in what unconditional love, total responsibility, and the transformation of priorities really meant, things that neither his MBA studies nor his decades of business experience had been able to teach him. The man who had once run board meetings at 6 in the morning after sleeping 4 hours now woke up every 2 hours to prepare bottles, change diapers, and walk around the small apartment with Mateo against his chest, discovering that he had never been happier in his life, despite the constant exhaustion. "You have to sleep," Isabel would tell him at 4 in the morning, finding him walking around the tiny living room with Mateo, who seemed to have inherited the nighttime schedules of his adoptive father. "I can do it. You need to rest more than me." Diego adjusted the organic cotton blanket around the baby. "Besides, I think he prefers my voice for nighttime serenades." It was true. Mateo would calm down immediately when Diego spoke to him in that soft, deep voice he had used to negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts, but which he now used to tell stories about the hotels that had belonged to his family, as if he were preparing his son for a future that no longer seemed as important as it once did. "Someday," he would whisper to Mateo as the baby slept in his arms, "you can choose whether you want to be part of the family business, or if you want to be an astronaut, an artist, a teacher, or anything that makes you happy. The only thing that matters is that you are a good person." At 2 months old, Diego made a decision that surprised even Isabel, who had begun to believe that he had really changed, but was still prepared for some kind of reversion to his old personality. "I found a house," he announced one February afternoon while watching Mateo sleep peacefully in his lap, an image he had captured in photos from every possible angle. "A house?" "In Chambéry. Nothing extravagant, just a normal house for a normal family. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small garden, close to a good public school and a park where Mateo can play when he's older." Isabel stopped folding the tiny clothes she had just washed and looked at him with an expression that mixed curiosity and caution. "Diego Herrera wants to live in a normal house. Diego Herrera wants his son to grow up knowing that love is more important than money, that family dinners around a kitchen table are more valuable than business meetings in luxury restaurants, that having a garden to play in and get dirty is better than having a penthouse with panoramic views where everything has to be kept impeccable." Diego carefully got up so as not to wake Mateo and walked to the small apartment's window, which overlooked the building's interior courtyard and the windows of other similar apartments. "I want him to grow up knowing the neighbors, playing with other kids in the neighborhood, going to the public school where he learns to interact with people from all socio-economic levels. I want him to understand that he is no better than anyone because his father has money. The move happened when Mateo was exactly 3 months old. Diego sold his luxury penthouse for a sum that could have bought 5 houses like the one they had chosen, and he got rid of most of his extravagant possessions, keeping only the essentials and a few pieces with sentimental value. The new house was perfect in its imperfection. Spacious without being ostentatious, with high ceilings and large windows that let in a lot of natural light, a large kitchen where they could have breakfast together every morning, and where Mateo would have space for his toys when he was older, a comfortable living room with sofas where the baby could crawl freely and safely, and a small but cozy garden with a perfect tree for future swings. "Do you regret it?" Isabel asked him one night while they were preparing dinner together, Mateo sleeping peacefully in his rocking chair in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of sofrito and the sound of their voices. "Regret what?" "All of this. Changing your life completely. Giving up your active career, your old lifestyle, your identity as the most powerful hotel magnate in Madrid." Diego stopped chopping vegetables for the stew he had learned to make by following the recipes Isabel had taught him, and he walked over to her, putting his arms around her from behind, his hands resting gently on hers as they continued to cook together. "Isabel, for the first time in my adult life, I wake up every morning wanting to live the day. Not because I have an important meeting that could result in millions in profit, or a deal to close that will impress my competitors, but because I have a family that loves me unconditionally. I have a baby who smiles when he sees me. I have a woman who trusts me enough to build a life with me again. How could I regret trading money for true love?" Mateo chose that moment to wake up with a little whimper that would quickly turn into a cry if he wasn't attended to immediately, and they both laughed with that laughter of new parents who had learned to interpret every sound the baby made. "Your turn," Isabel told Diego. "Our turn," he corrected, and together they went to attend to their son as they had done hundreds of times in the last 3 months, as they would do thousands of times in the years to come. As Diego held Mateo and Isabel prepared the bottle, they both moved in a perfect synchrony, developed through sleepless nights, exhausting days, and the gradual realization that they had created something beautiful together. Not just a baby, but a real family built on mutual commitment and genuine love. But would this domestic happiness that seemed straight out of a fairy tale be enough to hold together a family, built on the foundation of so much past pain? Or were there still tests waiting for them that would challenge their new life in unpredictable ways? A year after Mateo's birth, Diego found himself doing something he had never done in his 43 years of life, pushing a stroller through the Retiro Park on a Sunday morning, with no rush, no business agenda waiting for him, no phone glued to his ear coordinating acquisitions or mergers. Mateo, now 12 months old, had taken his first steps the week before, straight into Diego's open arms, in a moment that had made the magnate-turned-full-time dad cry. Since then, the child had been exploring the world with the fierce curiosity and determination that he seemed to have inherited from both parents. "Dada!" Mateo had started saying that word with increasing frequency, and every time he said it, Diego felt as if his heart would explode with happiness and paternal pride. "Yes, champ, Dada is here." Diego knelt down to Mateo's level, who was enthusiastically pointing at the ducks in the Retiro pond. "Do you want to feed them?" It was a rhetorical question, because Diego had started carrying bags of special duck bread every time they went to the park, a routine he had researched exhaustively to ensure it was nutritionally appropriate for the birds. Isabel watched them from a nearby bench, a soft smile on her face as she read a book on art pedagogy for a specialization course that Diego had insisted on paying for, not as an imposition, but as an investment in the professional dreams she had had to abandon during their previous marriage. She was wearing a simple yellow dress they had bought together at Zara, not in the luxury boutiques they had frequented during their old life, and she looked more beautiful and authentic than Diego remembered her looking during the years when she dressed exclusively in designers that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "What are you thinking about?" Diego sat down next to her on the bench after helping Mateo throw breadcrumbs to the ducks, keeping a protective eye on his son, who had decided that chasing pigeons was more fun than feeding ducks. "About how different everything is now. About how different we are as people, as a couple, as a family. Diego followed her gaze to Mateo, who had discovered a fallen leaf that was apparently interesting enough to examine with the seriousness of a scientist studying a new species. "No, little one, you don't eat leaves." Diego quickly approached to rescue the leaf from Mateo's curious hands, and the child smiled at him with that smile that showed his 6 new teeth and that could melt the coldest heart. "Do you ever regret it?" Isabel asked suddenly, a question they had avoided for months but which occasionally floated between them like a passing cloud on a mostly sunny day. It was a question Diego had expected, because he had asked it of himself in moments of deep reflection during the nights when he couldn't sleep. Not from business stress, but from the pure happiness of knowing he had a family sleeping peacefully in the adjoining rooms. Regret what, exactly? The 800 million in assets you had working for you, the power you wielded over decisions that affected thousands of employees, the freedom to travel anywhere in the world when you wanted, the life you could have had without the responsibilities of being a full-time father. Diego took his time to answer, watching Mateo try to chase a pigeon that was clearly faster and more experienced at avoiding enthusiastic toddlers. "Do you know the exact moment I knew I had chosen well?" he asked finally. Isabel shook her head, genuinely curious. 3 weeks ago, when Mateo was sick with that fever that scared us so much. Do you remember? We spent the whole night awake, taking turns taking his temperature every 20 minutes, rocking him when he cried from discomfort, calling the emergency pediatrician at 2 in the morning. Diego paused, remembering that night that had been simultaneously terrifying and revealing. At 4 in the morning, he finally fell asleep in my arms after hours of crying. You had fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion in the rocking chair next to his crib, with your hand still extended toward him in case he woke up again. Diego got up from the bench and walked to where Mateo had found a new fascination, an ant carrying a crumb bigger than itself. I realized that for the first time in my adult life, there was no place in the world I would rather be. There was no business meeting, no multi-million-dollar contract, no international expansion opportunity that was more important than that moment of taking care of my sick son while the woman I love rested, trusting that I could handle the situation. Isabel felt tears pricking her eyes, but this time they were tears of happiness and gratitude, not of pain or frustration. That was my definitive answer, Isabel. That was my confirmation that everything I left behind, the power, the prestige, the adoration of the business media, the feeling of being indispensable in the corporate world, wasn't worth a second of what we have now. Isabel got up from the bench and walked over to him, taking his hand as they both watched Mateo discover the world with the infinite fascination of someone who sees every day as a new adventure. "I also have something to confess," Isabel said. "What?" "Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, especially when it rains and I can hear Mateo's breathing from his room and you're breathing next to me. And I can't believe this is real, that you are here by choice, not by obligation, that Mateo has a father who loves him unconditionally, that we have this life we're building together day by day." Isabel stopped, emotion making her voice crack slightly. "For so long I thought that real happiness, the happiness you see in movies and read about in books, was something that happened to other people, people who had been luckier or made better decisions than me." Diego let go of her hand to put his arms around her, hugging her while Mateo played safely near them, completely oblivious to the emotional moment his parents were sharing. "It's real, love. And we're going to protect it, nurture it and enjoy it with everything we have every day for the rest of our lives." Mateo chose that perfect moment to totter toward them with his arms outstretched, falling gently onto the park grass with a musical giggle that made both parents laugh too, breaking the serious moment but maintaining the deep emotional connection. "Come here, little adventurer." Isabel picked him up, covering him with kisses while he laughed and tried to grab her hair. "It's time to go home for a nap." As they walked back to their house in Chamberí, Diego pushing the empty stroller because Mateo preferred to walk holding his parents' hands, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led them to this moment of everyday happiness. 2 months after that conversation in the park, Diego faced a test he hadn't anticipated. The Madrid business world had finally noticed his complete transformation, and the reactions were not universally positive. "Mr. Herrera." Cristina entered his office at Herrera Hospitality, where Diego now appeared only 2 days a week for general supervision, with a concerned expression. Executives Españoles magazine wants to do an interview about your change of lifestyle. Diego looked up from the quarterly reports he was reviewing, documents that had once been the center of his universe, but that now simply formed part of his reduced responsibilities. What kind of interview? They want to talk about how the most successful hotel magnate in Madrid abandoned his career to be a full-time father. Apparently, it's a story that's causing a lot of chatter in business circles. Diego sighed. He had hoped his transition would go unnoticed, but in a world where the movements of multi-millionaire CEOs were followed like spectator sports, that had been naive. What are they saying? Cristina hesitated, clearly uncomfortable being the messenger of corporate gossip. Some say you had a nervous breakdown. Others speculate that the company is in financial trouble and you are retiring before a collapse. And there are rumors about your personal family situation. What kind of rumors? That you reconnected with your ex-wife, that you are raising another man's child, that you sold your luxury properties to live like a normal person. Cristina stopped. Sir, some of your former partners are concerned about your mental stability. Diego leaned back in his chair, considering the options. He could ignore the rumors and let people speculate, or he could take control of the narrative and explain his transformation on his own terms. Arrange the interview, he decided, but with conditions. I want it to be at my house, not the office. I want them to meet my family. And I want them to understand that this is not a crisis. It's the smartest decision I've ever made in my life. The interview took place on a Saturday morning in the garden of their house in Chamberí. The journalist, Carlos Mendoza, had arrived expecting to find signs of financial decline or emotional instability, but he found something completely different. Diego greeted them dressed casually, but with that natural presence that characterizes born leaders. Playing with Mateo in the garden, while Isabel prepared homemade coffee and pastries for everyone. Mr. Herrera, the journalist began, many people in the business world are confused by your recent decisions. Can you explain why a man at the peak of his business career would choose to retire from active leadership? Diego picked up Mateo, who had been building towers with colored blocks, and sat him on his lap. Do you see this child? Diego asked. His name is Mateo. He is 14 months old. He says Dada when he sees me come home. He laughs when I make silly faces at him, and he trusts me completely to take care of him, protect him, and teach him how to be a good man. The journalist was taking notes, but it was obvious he hadn't expected this direction in the interview. For 15 years I built a business empire, thinking that success was measured in numbers, revenue, properties, market power. But do you know what I discovered? That you can have 800 million euros and wake up every morning feeling empty. Isabel approached with a tray of coffee, and Diego naturally included her in the conversation. This is Isabel, my wife, Mateo's mother, and the most talented art teacher I know. During our first marriage, I treated her as an accessory to my professional success. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Isabel sat down next to them, taking Mateo in her arms when the child decided he preferred to explore the journalist's pens. Don't you fear that your competitors will take advantage of your absence from active leadership? The journalist asked. My competitors can have my market shares, Diego replied. I have something that none of them can buy. A family that loves me, a son who needs me, and the certainty that I am living the life I really want to live. The interview continued for 2 hours, with Diego explaining without defensiveness or regret how he had come to prioritize fatherhood over profits, how he had found more satisfaction teaching Mateo to walk than closing multi-million-dollar contracts, how he had discovered that true wealth was not accumulated in bank accounts, but in moments shared with the people you love. When the article was published 2 weeks later, the reactions were mixed but powerful. Some businessmen criticized him as an example of a poorly managed midlife crisis. Others defended him as someone who had had the courage to redefine success in human rather than economic terms. But the letters from readers that came to the magazine were overwhelmingly positive. Fathers who worked 80 hours a week and missed their children's childhoods. Husbands who had sacrificed their marriages for corporate promotions. People who had spent decades chasing goals that didn't make them happy. The true test of Diego's new life came unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon, when Mateo was 18 months old and had developed a personality as strong as his determination to explore all the dangerous corners of his expanded world. Diego, I have to take him to the hospital, Isabel called from the bathroom, her voice tense with controlled panic. Mateo hit his head on the edge of the bathtub. He's bleeding a lot. Diego, who had been in the garden planting flowers that Mateo could help take care of when he was older, ran into the house immediately. He found Isabel holding Mateo, who was crying intensely while blood dripped from a wound on his forehead that looked terrifying, but was probably less serious than it appeared. In that moment, Diego experienced the pure terror that only parents understand, the feeling that the world could end if something happened to their child. It's okay. Diego took control of the situation, with the calm he had developed managing business crises, but which he now applied to something infinitely more important. Head wounds bleed a lot, but are usually minor. Let's go to the hospital now. During the taxi ride to the Hospital Clínico San Carlos, the same hospital where Mateo had been born, Diego held his son in his arms, while Isabel pressed a clean towel against the wound. Mateo had stopped crying but was clearly shaken, clinging to Diego's neck with a total trust that made the father's heart break and fill with love simultaneously. "Dada here," Diego whispered to him. "Dada is going to take care of you. Everything is going to be okay." In the emergency room, while they waited for a doctor to sew Mateo's wound with 3 small stitches, Diego had a revelation about what it really meant to be a father. It wasn't just the beautiful moments, the first words, the first steps, the smiles and the laughs. It was also this, the absolute terror that something bad could happen to your child, the overwhelming responsibility to protect someone who is completely dependent on you, the realization that your heart now lives outside your body in the form of another person. "Are you okay?" the doctor asked after the procedure. "The child is perfect, but you look very pale." Diego realized that he had been holding his breath throughout the process. "He's my first child," he explained. "I've never been so scared in my life." That night, after Mateo had fallen asleep with a small bandage on his forehead that made him look like a little warrior, Diego and Isabel sat in the living room. "Do you know what I thought today?" Diego said. "What?" "That if something had happened to Mateo, all the millions I have in the bank would have been useless. There's no amount of money that can buy your child's health or bring him back if you lose him." Diego got up and walked to the window that overlooked the garden where they had spent so many happy afternoons. "For years I thought that money was power, that power was security, that security was happiness. But today I realized that true vulnerability is loving someone more than yourself, and that vulnerability is also the only real source of meaning in life." Isabel walked over to him, taking his hand. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," Diego admitted. "Every day I wake up knowing that the most important person in my life is someone who still can't tie his own shoes or cross the street alone. It's the greatest responsibility I've ever had." "But do you regret it?" Diego looked at her with a smile that mixed exhaustion, love, and a deep satisfaction he had never experienced during his years of business success. "Isabel, before Mateo, before I found you again, I wasn't really alive. I was functioning, succeeding according to the metrics that society values, but I wasn't living." That night, as they listened to Mateo's soft breathing through the monitor, a breathing that confirmed he was healthy and safe, they both understood that they had passed the most important test of their lives. They had learned to love completely, without reservations, without conditions, without fear of the emotional cost. 3 years after the devastating reunion at El Jardín, Diego woke up as he did every morning for months, with Mateo, now 3 years old, jumping on his bed and shouting, "Dada, get up! The birds are awake!" It was a spring Sunday in Madrid, and the golden light filtered through the curtains of the bedroom he shared with Isabel, creating warm patterns on the walls, painted a soft blue color they had chosen together on a family shopping afternoon at IKEA. "Good morning, champ," Diego hugged Mateo, inhaling that unique smell of a clean child mixed with the baby lotion they still used. "Did you sleep well?" "I dreamed about elephants." Mateo had that way of speaking of 3-year-olds, where every sentence was an exciting declaration. "And there was a pink one." Isabel woke up gradually, smiling as she watched the morning routine she had come to love more than any luxury of her old life. A messy-haired Diego in pajamas, completely focused on his son's fantastic stories, without any vestige of the impeccable executive he had once been. "Coffee?" Isabel asked, stretching. "I'll make it." Diego got up, carrying Mateo. You rest a few more minutes. It was part of their weekend ritual. Diego prepared breakfast while Isabel took a leisurely shower, something she had learned to appreciate after years of morning routines timed to the minute. In the kitchen, while making coffee and cutting fruit for Mateo, Diego reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led them to this moment of everyday happiness. It had begun with a bitter end, a divorce full of resentment and cruel words. It had continued with a devastating reunion that had exposed the emotional poverty of his seemingly successful life. It had gone through months of growth, change, and the gradual transformation of a business magnate into a devoted father. And it had culminated in this, a life that was extraordinary precisely because it was ordinary, meaningful because it was built on real love instead of superficial achievements. "Dada, look!" Mateo had managed to climb onto a chair and was pointing out the window to the garden. "The flowers we planted are growing." Diego walked over to the window and saw that he was right. The sunflowers they had planted together as a father-son project were beginning to sprout small green leaves. "You're right, champ. They're growing because we water them and take care of them, just like Dada and Mama take care of you." Isabel came into the kitchen dressed in jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair still wet from the shower, and Diego thought, as he thought every morning, that he had never seen anyone more beautiful. "What are our plans for today?" Isabel asked, pouring orange juice for Mateo into his favorite cup, the one with drawings of farm animals. "Park," Mateo announced with authority. "And swings and ducks. The park sounds perfect," Diego agreed. "And after that we can stop at the market to buy ingredients to make homemade pizza tonight." It was this kind of simple plan that now constituted Diego's happiness. Afternoons in the park pushing Mateo on the swings, teaching him to feed ducks, watching him make friends with other children, while he and Isabel talked to other parents about completely normal topics like teething, tantrums, and the best schools in the neighborhood. After breakfast, as they were getting ready to go out, Diego received a work call. It was Rodriguez, his successor as CEO, with a question about an investment opportunity in Portugal. "What do you think?" Rodriguez asked. "We could significantly expand our presence in the Portuguese market." "I trust your judgment," Diego replied, watching Mateo try to put his shoes on the wrong way. "Make the decision you think is best for the company. You don't want to review the numbers, the projections, the risk analyses. Rodriguez, we hired the best analysts in Spain. If they recommend the investment, do it. I have more important commitments today." After hanging up, Diego knelt down to help Mateo with his shoes. "Work?" Isabel asked. "Nothing that can't wait." Diego finished tying Mateo's shoelaces. "Portugal will still be there tomorrow. Mateo is only going to be 3 once." In the park, Diego watched his son run with the unlimited energy of childhood, making instant friends with other children, sharing toys without thinking about cost or ownership, living completely in the present moment. "What are you thinking about?" Isabel sat down next to him on their favorite bench from where they could supervise the entire playground area. Diego watched Mateo try to climb a slide that was clearly too big for him, but with the stubborn determination he had inherited from both parents. "I'm thinking about time," Diego replied, "about how I've measured it at different times in my life." Isabel followed his gaze to Mateo, who had managed to climb halfway up the slide before deciding he might need help. "What do you mean?" "During my 20s and 30s, I measured time in financial quarters. Every 3 months was an opportunity to show growth, to impress investors, to expand the empire." Diego got up to help Mateo with the slide, carrying him to the top and holding him securely as the child slid down with shouts of pure joy. "Again, Dada! Again!" Mateo shouted, running immediately back to the stairs. "During my early 40s, Diego continued, carrying Mateo up a second time, I measured time in acquisitions, in contracts, in the amount of power I could accumulate in a fiscal year. And now?" Diego helped Mateo down from the slide a third time, laughing as the child asked for higher Dada with each descent. "Now I measure time in firsts. The first time Mateo said Dada, the first time he slept through the night, the first time he brought me a flower from the garden that he had picked especially for me." Isabel walked over to them, watching this routine she had seen dozens of times, but which never lost its charm. "Do you know what I realized?" Diego took Isabel's hand as they both watched their son chase butterflies. "That for years I was building the wrong legacy." "What do you mean?" I thought my legacy would be the hotels, the properties, the money I could leave for future generations. But my real legacy is him. Diego pointed toward Mateo, who was now explaining to another child the correct technique for chasing butterflies. My legacy is raising a man who knows how to love unconditionally, who treats people with respect, regardless of their economic status, who understands that happiness comes from relationships, not possessions. Isabel squeezed his hand. And aren't you afraid that when he's older, he won't understand why you gave up so much power for him? Diego smiled, watching Mateo share his toys with a child who clearly had fewer economic resources, making friends with the natural ease of someone who hadn't yet learned about class differences. On the contrary, I hope that when Mateo is older, he will look back and remember that his father was present for every important moment of his childhood, that he didn't miss a single soccer game for a business meeting, that he didn't cancel a single family dinner for a multi-million-dollar contract. That afternoon, after making homemade pizza together in the kitchen, with Mateo helping by spreading flour over every available surface, they sat in the garden to have dinner outdoors, under the first stars of the Madrid night. "Let's make a toast," Diego said, raising his glass of wine while Isabel raised hers, and Mateo raised his glass of milk. "To what?" Isabel asked. "To the love that found a way to be reborn." Diego looked at his family, his true wealth. "To the second chances we didn't think we deserved. To a future built on a solid foundation of trust, commitment, and unconditional love." Mateo, not fully understanding the words but feeling the importance of the moment, clinked his glass against his parents' glasses with the seriousness of someone participating in a meaningful ritual. As the stars appeared one by one in the Madrid sky, Diego Herrera, formerly a hotel magnate, now simply Dad, knew with absolute certainty that he had made the smartest trade of his life. He had traded a fortune for a family, power for purpose, success according to the world for meaning according to his heart, and he had gained everything that truly mattered. Love, after all, had found a way to be reborn stronger, wiser, and more enduring than it had been the first time, and this time it was here to stay forever.